Welcome to TUSB Conversations. In the last few months, we've been talking to leaders and mentors about some of the biggest ideas shaping the business landscape in 2022. Today, we are shifting gears a bit to talk to our young audience, specifically those who have enjoyed the workforce in the last 2 years amidst the pandemic, lockdowns, and hybrid working. TUSB speaker and leadership mentor Bharat Wakhlu joined us to share his top tips and insights for young professionals just starting off in the corporate world and what they should know about the changing work environment. Bharat, I want to start by talking about your book, Navigating the Maze, where you talk about strategies one can use to fast track success in the workplace. What prompted you to write it?
The book Navigating the Maze, Simple Smart Strategies to Fast Track Success, was written primarily because we knew that as more and more young people enter the workforce in the corporate sector, as entrepreneurs in startups and so on, they need to have certain capabilities and skills in place for them to be effective. Now, you might say, what do you mean by effective? Effectiveness has three dimensions. The first dimension is that you have to be able to remain steadfast, happy, and at peace with yourself, irrespective of what is happening around you. And that really is, to my mind, we didn't know it then, but I think the messages in our book, or the ideas that we have shared in our book, would have come in extremely handy to people who went through the pandemic, because the pandemic was a disruption. All through the book, we've been saying that young professionals you get used to the idea that disruptions are a part of life. Companies close, mergers and acquisitions happen, jobs get modified, altered, people come in, new people come in, bosses take a liking for you, some may not like you. That's part of the dynamic of organizations and of life itself. Now look what's happening in Ukraine, for instance. I mean, who knew that in this day and age there'd be a war in Europe? So disruptions have to be understood as being a part of life itself. So this is a fundamental thread in our book, that we have to appreciate this. And because life will throw these curveballs at people time and again, we wanted to make sure that young professionals are not they don't go under because of this. Because we had been seeing a lot of young people getting very, very stressed, getting their mental health getting affected. So we said we need to write a book that prepares young professionals for the vicissitudes of life, and it gives them the tools and the techniques that they need to stay robust and resilient, irrespective of what's happening on the outside. So that really was the essential reason why my wife Savita and I wrote this book in 2016. And I must also share with you that a lot of people who read the book and who reread the book during the pandemic have come back to us saying that we are deeply appreciative of the guidance that the book gives, because it helped us to tide over the pandemic with a sense of agency, a sense of accountability, a sense of peace. And I think that, Danish, is a huge validation of the fact that the book has made a difference.
Do you, both of you, want to write another chapter to it or make any edits to it now? I mean, pandemic has taught you a lot of things, but is there anything you want to add to it?
I haven't discussed this with my wife Savita, but I would definitely like to add a chapter on the need for each one of us pursuing a spiritual, I wouldn't say a ritual, but a spiritual understanding of life. For instance, realizing that life is short, and realizing that material things can never give the spirit joy. I think that is a starting point of the journey of seeking that I want every young man, woman, boy, girl to start their journey on. Because, for too long, the materialistic paradigm has dominated communications in marketing. They have dominated the advertising orientation. And the truth is, Danish, that the material world can never give your interiority joy. And therefore, it's important that everybody realizes this early in their lives rather than later. Typically a lot of young people think that, oh, I can, I'm a hot shot, I'll do this, I'll do that. But then, life will always unfurl on its own terms. Young people have to realize this and embrace those terms, whatever they are. And within those confines, within those limitations, do the best they can. See, excellence as a leadership and a managerial pursuit is not dependent on what's happening on the outside. It's really a personal orientation, an element of what I call self-mastery. So if I want to give my best to serve others joyfully and effectively, I have to make sure that from my own deepest core, I serve with love, I serve with excellence, I serve with devotion, and that will give me satisfaction. That is what we define as success in our book, not getting a designation or being this or that, because all those things, Danish, are transient and will end someday.
I mean, if it's coming from you, I know there's a lot of experience and study which has gone to it. I mean, somebody who's young would think, no, this doesn't work. I need to bulldoze my way. It's a war room out there. I need to prove a point. But with what you said, that spiritual understanding of life and self-mastery, with this in background, right? With this in background, what are the few tips which you can share for young professionals?
Okay, first and foremost, so thank you very much for appreciating where I'm coming from. It is true that this is based on my own life's journey and my own understanding of life as it is. Now, I think young people have to start off by understanding that none of them, and that includes you, me, anybody else who's listening to this podcast, none of us can ever use the phrase that, oh, we are where we are because of our own effort. I'm sorry, life isn't like that. We are all interdependent. And I won't go far away from where we are, but even this morning's breakfast, just think about it. The bread that's come to your table has come because some diligent farmer somewhere in some part of this beautiful country has taken the trouble to sow the wheat in time, tend to it, harvest it, send it to the granaries, and then for curing and cleaning and all that, and get it to the company that has ground it and shipped it to us, to the baker, and the baker who's made the bread. So even in something like you having a sandwich, for heaven's sake, there are so many people involved. Now, when you look at your own life, apart from your family, your grandparents, your grandmother, your uncles and aunts who may have brought you up, your parents, of course, your siblings, your elder siblings, there's a huge community. And I'm not only talking about your teachers. I'm talking about even the doctor, the compounder who gave you your first injection when you were a baby. My God, this is such a huge network. And if we start off by being grateful to all these people, it makes us kinder. It makes our ability to be better leaders. It makes us more compassionate and understanding of one another. And I think that is what young people have to be today. Not fighting each other, not pitting, one person against the other, but playing the game in a kind, compassionate, loving manner, so the best in them comes out. Let's not forget that we give our best only when we are relaxed, when we feel loud, when we feel valued, when we feel doing something purposeful. And that is what young people have to learn to discover in themselves. Not fighting for designations. Yes, of course, if you want to be at a certain position, be there, of course. go for it, but not in a way where you have to use a machete to cut others down or whatever. I mean, that kind of a paradigm, I think, has got to be chucked out immediately. Now, many people have asked me, and I'm constantly replying to young professionals on WhatsApp groups and so on, and they ask, but this person spoke to me badly. Well, you don't have to necessarily fight such a person, but you have to use your verbal fluency, which you are gifted with, unlike other animals, which can only fight aggressively or run away passively. You, as a human being, have been given the gift of verbal fluency, and therefore use that beautiful gift of verbal fluency and make sure that you resolve your interpersonal differences by being assertive, speaking up your mind, speaking about what you're feeling in a given situation. And that is something I think is the other important thing. Young people have got to learn the skills of assertiveness, something that I have for all my life advocated. It is an extraordinary capability that's been gifted to us by existence itself. Unlike other animals, use the power of communication to resolve hurt, resolve differences, listen to one another. And if I were in a position to speak to Biden and Putin and Zelensky right now, I'd tell them the same thing. Guys, sit on the table, talk assertively, listen to one another, and get the heck out of each other's hair.
Dialogue is important, and I think that's the base of any firm, right? When there is, like you've mentioned in our previous podcast about engaging, right? That's what engaging is, dialogue, that you sit across the table and you discuss, right? You don't need to prove a point, you just need to discuss, and that's what TOSP Conversations is about. It sparks a conversation and then you talk about it.
Exactly.
Right?
But more importantly, if I may interrupt you for a moment, Danish, it's also important that the dialogue, which typically people interpret as just speaking, it has to be preceded by a lot of listening.
Yes.
And people unfortunately have this misconception that listening to another means you're agreeing with whatever is being said. No, you listen, but you may not agree with what has been said. And I think that difference is a very significant distinction, which we have to keep on reminding people that, look, just because you're listening to the other person doesn't mean that you're agreeing. So you get a perspective when you listen attentively, when you listen without bias, when you listen without prejudice, when you listen without being opinionated about something. It opens up a whole new set of possibilities that are really essential for not just young professionals, since we're talking about navigating the maze, our book, but for everybody, for anyone, any leader, any executive to be effective. These are essential requirements.
I think I agree, because dialogue doesn't mean that you have to keep quiet. And I just remember this line by Voltaire, which I loved that when I first read it, that I may not disagree with you, but I will fight till I die so that you can put your point across.
Absolutely correct. And frankly, for someone like Voltaire to say this, it brings in a huge touch of power to this, for the simple reason that Voltaire himself was assassinated as he was healing himself in a bathtub. You're aware of that? He was murdered while he was healing his skin rash. He was in a bathtub and he was assassinated. So people like that are sometimes not liked, because people are so rigid in their views that listening becomes difficult also. But you're right, absolutely correct.
Yeah, Bharat, tell me, so when we say that we have to listen, right? Sometimes you just go quiet and then you're listening. But can you be mindful in your books, Navigating the Maze, right? Is there any framework, or not a framework, but a thought which is left that this is how I should listen, and then ponder upon it? Probably not at that point, but later on, and then see that how can we engage more and come up with something constructive.
Very good. This is a very good question, Danish, and I'm so glad you asked it. Typically a lot of people feel that just nodding your head in a dialogue shows that you're listening. No, listening actively actively means that after the other person has spoken, you paraphrase what the person has said. So if the person said, look, I'm very unhappy with the manner in which you are talking to us, or in which you have been engaging with us. Now that's what the other person said. Now you have heard this and you paraphrase it. So you will say, okay, so what I hear you saying is that I do not talk to you appropriately. I don't engage with you appropriately. Is that right? And the other person says, yes, absolutely. Then you will say, okay, what do you really mean by inappropriately engaging with you? And that's how the dialogue continues. You listen, you paraphrase, the other person agrees or disagrees, and that's how the knowledge expands. You see, at the end of the day, one of the reasons why people cannot come to any kind of an agreement is because the knowledge with which they start isn't enhanced. After all, how can I take a call on a complex matter if I do not understand the entire complexity of the whole thing? And it's not only listening actively and nodding my head, but paraphrasing and getting confirmation from the other side that that's exactly what is the issue. And when you have therefore come to that issue, you can then say, okay, now that we understand the 3 or 4 issues that need to be resolved and we have diagnosed them, let's understand where they come from. Let's do a root cause analysis. Let's move to what we call a diagnostic journey, and we finally remedy the matter completely. That is the way of making ours a better world. Sadly, people have lost the art of listening, and therefore people are in a rush to just say what they want to say. So that's another thing that we talk about a lot in our book, about the need for people to be more receptive to ideas from people who may not be like you, who may have a divergent perspective, who may have a different perspective. Listen to them, paraphrase what they're saying, and try and expand the overall understanding and the knowledge available on the basis of which a call can be taken.
Right. On that note, I have to thank you for giving us the time, and people who are listening, pick up your copy of Navigating the Maze. And remember what Bharat said right at the start of the podcast: spiritual understanding of life. Once you do that, you engage with people, your dialogue will happen, and then the stage of self-mastery will come. Bharat, on that note, thank you very much for being part of the TUSP Conversations.
Thank you very much, Danish. It's always a pleasure talking to you.